morning, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of ACSW Spring 2026 virtual meeting. Thank you all for being here and supporting our club. Quick housekeeping note, please submit your questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. We are not using the chat function during the sessions. I'm happy to start with introducing our first speakers for the day. Michael Markham is a fellow of the Society of Actuaries, currently serving as the Senior Actuary, Director of Life and Health Actuarial Office at the Texas Department of Insurance. Primary responsibilities include oversight of rate filings related to life, health, annuity, and other related products for the state of Texas. He has 25 years of actuarial experience, including property casualty, life and health, asset liability management, cash flow testing, and actuarial model building, to name a few. Michael has been with the TDI since 2015, most recently working with Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services to realign with rating areas within the state and have Texas designated as an effective rate review state for 2023. He was a co-developer of the Texas Approach for Long-Term Care Rate Review. Michael is an active volunteer with the SOA, having previously written and graded questions on FSA exams. Bing Wu is a fellow of the Society of Actuaries and currently serves as the lead actuary in the Life and Health Actuarial Office at the Texas Department of Insurance. A graduate of the University of Texas, Bing brings over 15 years of actuarial experience across both private and public sectors. He began his career with a decade at United Healthcare, developing deep expertise in health insurance analytics. He then spent 3 years at Tokyo Marine, focusing on travel insurance before joining TDI in 2021. Since then, Bing has played a key role in reviewing PPACA rate filings and starting in 2023, helped building the framework for Texas effective rate review process. His strong analytical skills have been instrumental in helping LHAO navigate the evolving challenges of the health insurance market. Thank you both for joining us today, and let's go ahead and start with the session. Michael, you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, thank you for the Actuarial Club of the Southwest for having me once again. I always enjoy speaking here. It's a great opportunity for me and my staff to interact with the industry. The presentation, which I'm getting ready to give, was submitted to the SOA and is included on the fellowship syllabus. Of course, in regards to reviewing a long-term care, it is an ongoing process. We're always looking for better ways to evaluate long-term care, and our primary goal is to do what we can to help stabilize the rates in this block, which have, quite frankly, gotten out of hand. Because I have so many slides, I'm going to try to get through them. We will get through them in the hour, and we can address any questions at the end. And if you have other questions, feel free to contact me. My contact information is on the presentation, and I can answer questions more directly. Can you go to the next slide? That's me, and that's Bing. Okay, that's Fizz. By the way, I'm Michael Markham again. I am the director for Life and Health Actuarial Office for Rate Review. Bing Wu is the lead actuary, also on our team. When it comes to long-term care, there's two primary features which we're looking at. And by the way, that's single line. Every presentation which I give has to be reviewed internally, and they added a typo there. That should actually read rate adjustment with revised assumptions. But the two concerns with assumptions are revised to reflect experience. One is the sustainable premium, also known as the if-new or marginal premium, could also be described as a fairly discriminatory premium. And the other is the contract reserve deficiency, which we'll go over in more detail as we go through this, which is a primary concern when you revise the assumptions. Go to the next slide. These two graphs are the thing to keep in mind. If you can understand these two, you really have long-term care. Everything else is just details. Early in the life of the contracts, of course, they overpay. You have a level premium, and much of the premium is set aside to feed the contract reserves. The contract reserves can be thought as a savings account because, as you can see, the claims get larger over time, and the premiums will be insufficient to cover the claims. So the contract reserve absorbs the increase that occur in the latter duration. Whenever I talk about this block or any block, I say the three priorities that we have is that the block is sustainable over the lifetime for the insured, that it has a value for consumers, and that is profitable. And whenever I say this to the industry, they say, well, actually, profitability is part of the sustainability. I said, well, yeah, that's right. But I define profitability a little different. For me, I say profitable is I like to have a little bit of space there towards the end, so the company ensures that they're not losing money, but it also helps to stabilize the block. But as you can see, the contract reserve builds up over time in the early duration, then you get to the break-even point, and then you draw from those savings to help supplement the premiums to keep them stable. Okay, next slide. Long-term pricing and management. From initially, go to next slide. Long-term care products, this is from the LTC model regulation. LTC products are required to be designed and priced so that no future rate increases are to be anticipated. It's almost like a running joke with the rate increases that we've had. Claim projections must include a reasonable margin for unfavorable experience. This is actually meant to prevent having rate increases. And as you can see, that's where you can actually find it in the model regulation, 641, section 10. Okay, next slide. Another key component is the disabled life reserve. Disabled life reserve, that is the tabular reserve for people that are on claim. A note that I have here with the DLR, which is the unpaid portion of that, is fully funded in the period that the policyholder goes on claim from premium earned during that premium. When the premium is insufficient, the company must make up the deficiency from the surplus. This is the insurance risk borne by the insurer. It's critical that those on claim is funded by the premium in that period, instead of being supported by those who are actually paying premium, because if you do not do this, then it becomes unsustainable because you're depending on the active lives who should be paying premium to cover future claims to support those that are already on claim. Okay, next slide. These are the major underlying actuarial assumptions. They should look pretty common. Anybody who's taking exams, of course, mortality, morbidity, which is frequency and severity, discount rate, and lapse rate. Okay, next slide. Okay, why do we need contract reserves? As I said previously, claims occur in the latter durations, and the needed premium increases substantial latter durations. And the contract reserves act as a savings account to offset the higher premiums in latter years. Contract reserves are required by Model Law 10, that's the Health Insurance Reserves Model Regulation, Section 4, which I'm sure is included in maybe virtually all the states in the country. It's included in the TAC for Texas, it's TAC 3.7004. The lifetime loss ratio for long-term care products must be at least 60%. That's the minimum loss ratio. A large portion of the expense ratio, the 40%, is meant to cover acquisition costs. Most of the first-year premium is designed to cover these costs. You could actually say all of it. The contract reserves don't have to be held until after the first year. It's called a 1 year preliminary term. And also two components of the premium. There's the gross premium. That's what the consumer actually pays. And the net premium, the proportion of the gross premium meant to cover the cost of claims. Go to the next slide. By the way, there's two methods to hold the contract reserves. There's the gap. The gap reserves says contract reserves are created to offset premiums shortage later. The net premiums or premiums dedicated to claim payments are defined such that. How do we define what the net premiums are? Well, we take a present value of the future benefits. And that's what the present value of the future net premium has to be. So it's set as zero at time zero when you sell the contract. Policyholders actually pay gross premiums, so the present value of the gross future gross premiums are multiplied by a ratio K, such that K really is the target lifetime loss ratio. So the present value of future gross premiums times K should give you the present value of future net premium. So basically, how the gross premiums are generally determined, you get a present value of future benefits, and you divide by your target loss ratio, and presto, that's how you get your gross premiums. The ratio K is multiplied by the gross premiums to determine the net premium. This is how contract reserves are calculated on a GAAP basis. That's the generally accepted principles. And is the basis for the Texas method. Next slide. Of course, when you report to the state, we use statutory reserves. Insurers use a first-year preliminary term to cover the cost of selling the policy. Therefore, is at time one, which is after the first year, you set present value of future benefits equal to present value of future, it's called valuation premium, to distinguish it from the net premium. Present value of future valuation premium is different from net premium, and the valuation is calculated thus. You determine the K factor. The K factor, as you can see there, is how it's calculated. Present value of future benefits from year one on, divided by the present value of future gross premium. Contract reserves are reported to states on a statutory basis, unless those reported on a GAAP basis, and that determine the Texas method. Understanding the K factor is fundamental in understanding the Texas method and how we do our calculations. By the way, of course, the preliminary term generally originally was a 2-year preliminary term, and due to the issues with the long-term care, it's been set to a 1-year preliminary term. But my experience when I set up these seriata models for the contract reserves on a statutory basis, if it had a lifetime loss ratio of 60, it generally settled around 80. So, because it varies by the product, varies by the each individual, but generally that's where it will be. So between 75 and 80. Okay, next slide. Okay, so let me see. To ensure that the contract reserves are adequate, companies are required to do a gross premium valuation on an annual basis. As you can see in Model Law 10, this is actually Part D, also again in the Texas Administrative Code. I like to point out when companies and internally, in case there's any doubt of the frequency that these should be conducted, is the first word of the paragraph: annually. Annually, an appropriate review must be made of the insurer's prospective contract liabilities. Contracts basically include everything to ensure that they're reasonable. This review gives an early warning when adverse experience exceeds expectations. The insurer must take corrective action to make sure reserves are adequate as the block ages. If you were to read the health insurance model regulation, it says really in the first page that a gross premium valuation is the ultimate test of the adequacy of reserves, and any deficiency must be made up immediately. The held contract reserves, or the reserves that you hold, when you do the evaluation, and then as you adjust the assumptions, the necessary contract reserves are determined by the new assumptions adjusted to reflect experience. And for those who have not done this, let me tell you, that is a non-trivial task. It is actually pretty intensive to do that. Okay, so we go to the next tab. Okay, so this is what the data actually looks like. And by the way, we have a spreadsheet. It's we have two Excel spreadsheets that are included in the attachment. But like I said, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. But in order to get a better picture of what's going on, you have those spreadsheets there, and they're interactive. They're driven by formulas, so you can see how different things are calculated. So you can see the on the this right here is just, like I said, just a snapshot of it. The data on the left are the projected cash flows using the prior assumptions, and on the right reflects adjustments based on the experience that you're having. And let me tell you, in regards to the contract reserves, you want to make the correction, especially if you're undervaluing the assumptions as early as possible, so you can get the additional premium, so it can collect interest to help stabilize the block. Okay, next slide. If contract reserves are insufficient to cover future expected claims, action must be taken to cover the shortfall. Rate action is necessary to acquire the needed additional premium. When rate action is required, the revised rates are determined by the revised assumptions must be sustainable of the remaining contract lives so that no future rate increase is expected. A moderate margin should be included to offset actual claims exceeding your expectations. Okay, next slide. Okay, so when you have the experience and you adjust the expectations to reflect that, and you see that that you have a shortfall, of course you have to make those up immediately, but then you need to file for a rate increase, and the sooner the better to deal with the timing issues. The timing issues to submit the rates, to have them reviewed, and have them implemented. Okay, next slide. Okay, now again, resolving the GPV shortages. When a shortage is found, the insurer has three components of concern. There's the contract reserve deficiency. And for the person, for the company reviewing this, it's the contract reserve deficiency that is of the greatest concern, because you have this deficiency that has to be made up immediately, and an increase in rates can offset this deficiency. There's the marginal premium. Also goes by the if new premium or the fairly discriminatory premium. This premium is needed from the policy issue date to sustain the block. So even if you had the contract reserves at a sufficient level, you need to have a premiums at that level in order to sustain that over the lifetime. There's also the disabled life reserves, the claim liability reserve to cover future claim payments. The claim liability reserve to cover future claim payments for policyholders currently on claim. That's what that is. Since these liabilities happen before the valuations, additional funding can't come from the future rate increases. Again, this helps to ensure the sustainability. Okay, next slide. Okay, because keep in mind when the requested rate increase requirements. When rate action is required, the NAIC model regulation has a sufficiency requirement surrounding the rate increase. So if the requested premium rate schedule increase is implemented and the underlying assumptions which reflect moderate adverse conditions are realized, no future rate schedule increases are anticipated. So the rates, the revised rates are meant, is really ideally, they should be infrequent, the adjustment of the rates. Should only happen one or two times, but of course, that's not exactly what we're seeing. Okay, next slide. So let's look at what these formulas look like, the Texas method formulas. By the way, in fact, these formulas were actually created to look at the status of the block from an insurer's perspective of what you're dealing with when you revise the assumptions. Okay, go to the next slide. So these are the assumptions. We have rate stabilization, which was implemented in 2002, which requires that 85% of any rate increase must be dedicated to the claims. But they do permit a lowering of the initial loss ratio to 0.58. Prior to rate stabilization, a 60-80 rule is used. Again, the 80 is, of course, it's presented by a white paper by the NAIC. But 80% is about where if you used a 2-year preliminary term, where the rates would stabilize. Okay, so go to the next slide. This gives a description of the terms. It's basically 3 components. One is a change in the future claims, the future benefits based on the new assumptions. The second part, which is is the more complicated part of the formula. Actually, it's just a conversion of the gross premiums to the net premiums with a sliding scale from the initial lifetime loss ratio of 60% to basically the K factor, which you hear is 85%. The 85% times future gross premiums, that's the available premium that's the future premium that's available to absorb the rate increase. Okay, next slide. So what does the Texas PPV mean? What does it actually do? The formula justifies a rate increase to support present value of future claims by its present value of net premiums under the current assumptions minus the current contract reserves. What is that? It basically calculates the contract reserve deficiency with the new assumptions and adjusts the premium accordingly so that the insurer suffers no loss with the exception of issues with the timing issues. So the premiums are adjusted with the new assumptions such that the required contract reserves at the time of the valuation is the same as under the old assumptions. Stated another way, the contract reserve shortage with the new assumptions are passed to the policyholder in future premiums. Premiums are adjusted so that the insurer bears no loss due to contract reserve shortage. The policyholder has to bear the full brunt of the contract reserve shortage. And of course, this immediately raises questions about the fairly discriminatory rate. In the early durations, it doesn't become quite an issue because the rate increases are relatively small. However, in the latter durations, it becomes a bigger issue. Okay, next slide. See, let me get to the timing. Okay, this is a mathematical demonstration that shows that these formulas really do calculate the difference in the contract reserves, the contract reserve deficiency, and spreads it over future premium. First step is to turn the gross premiums into net premiums. The net premiums, the change in net premium, it just breaks it out to the components, rearranges them to the definition of the contract reserves. One note, the contract reserves reflect pricing. Actual statutory reserves are likely to be lower due to a higher K factor. By the way, my experience whenever I had contract reserves in the industry, I found that the gap reserves could be as high as 10 times the amount of the statutory reserves. Generally, the statutory reserves are generally set by the gross premium because I generally found that they were insufficient. But that's more of a side note. Okay, so we go to the next slide. So we can give a demonstration of what happens in practice. Okay, and this again uses the assumptions on the spreadsheet which I gave. Can't remember the name. The NAIC sample spreadsheet. Go to the next slide. Okay, so basically you can plug those values in and you get to 37.1. This is just a straight calculation putting those values in. And by the way, it is on the spreadsheet, and it has the formula so you can see how that 37.1 is calculated. For this demonstration, there was no prior rate increases, so the calculation is more straightforward. Okay, so go to the next slide, and we can see what you're actually seeing from the insurer's perspective. Okay, so you're the valuation actuary, and before you start this process of adjusting the assumptions, you see you're required to, on this block, to hold $962 million in contract reserves. Now you revise the assumptions, and you got to hold $1.2 billion, and you got $242 million of a deficiency that has to be made up immediately. In the presentation I did for the SOA, I kind of added some more comments that you'll see if you see it there. But I say, the valuation actuary sees this deficit. Now he has a concern because he has to go to senior management and show them that he has this $242 million deficit. The senior management is worried about the ROE, the impact on the stock price. And I say, okay, the valuation actuary first updates his resume because he doesn't know how this meeting is going to go. And he's going to present this to the senior management and show them the shortfall they have to be made up immediately. The Texas method gives them a quick answer that the Texas method gives us actuarial support for that deficit of the rate increase that we need so that the contract reserves are at the current level. So the 37.1, if that was implemented, ignoring timing issues, you can see the contract reserves on the bottom right with the current assumptions with the rate increase is identical to what it was before. One of the things that we use in this calculation too is we use the standard valuation rate, which is generally a lower rate, to help offset some of the concerns with the timing issues. Okay, fortunately, I tell you, at TDI, if we see a rate increase for 37.1, we are ecstatic. We generally approve that right away. Okay, so go to the next slide. Okay, Texas method limitations and strengths. Okay, go to the next slide. Texas method has some limitations. First of all, the Texas method does not determine what the marginal premium is. If prior increases result in premiums being below the marginal premium, then the justifiable rate increase may not be sufficient to sustain the block. As available premium shrinks, that's future premium, the Texas method supports excessive rate increases in the latter durations, because that's the denominator, that's the available premium. As that shrinks, the rate increases get larger. It's another reason why you try to determine it earlier. And it also has another issue whenever you try to use this on a nationwide basis, because the level of rate increases vary by states. States with larger gaps from the marginal premium, the contract reserve deficit will be greater, resulting in larger justifiable rate increases. Okay, next slide. Implementation of the Texas method from inception enhances the ability to maintain these marginal premiums as the life of the block progresses. A negative result of the Texas method identifies a company that is actually relaxing their contract reserve restrictions, while at the same time requesting a rate increase. The release of reserves may lead to a short-term profitability, but may imperil the long-term feasibility of the company. And approving rate increases above the Texas method recommendation will permit a company an immediate profit due to the release of the contract reserves. The contract reserves are designed to stabilize the block. If we were to justify a rate increase above what the Texas method demonstrates, it actually permits a company to release the contract reserves and doesn't really aid in the sustainability of the block. Okay, next slide. Additional issues that we're addressing, and that is the impact of historically low interest rate environment. From 2012 to 2022, the nation faced an unprecedented, extremely low interest rate environment. This period most likely ended, but steps are being taken to permit adjustments to premium should it return. What we do is we look at a lifetime analysis. I mean, most of the stuff that I'm presenting here, I presented in the past, and if you've been going to the Actual Club for a while, this is nothing new. But we're getting ready to cover some new material how we address this. Addressing unsustainability of inflation protection. That's another issue. The inflation protection has concerns about the sustainability of the block. Currently required as a standard option, increases benefits without offsetting by increasing premium. And we're also looking at setting an appropriate cap on premium in the latter durations, perhaps limiting premium based on remaining policyholders or remaining policy years. And what's following is actually the actual work of that. Okay, next slide. Okay, now yeah, we like the 37% rate increase. This is generally not the type of rate filings that we see these days. But like I said, I titled this, now what if something goes wrong? Let's consider a block from a company that is enforced since 2004. And you have another spreadsheet that actually, again, shows the details of of how we do the analysis here. But this block, it was originally priced at 6.25, which was reasonable in 2004. No rate adjustments were made since issue. And actually, we see this quite often. And, my initial question is, again, what about the annual gross premium valuation that you're required to do? The company's first realized loss was in 2025, and the company is requesting a 200% rate increase. And yes, we've seen much higher than this. Okay, so go to the next slide. Again, this spreadsheet, you can actually see it's on the main tab of the aggregate experience spreadsheet that you have. By the way, these data that we have here is actually I created myself from a simulation model that I created. It has its pluses and its minuses, but one of the minuses that it has, well, it shows first of all, the claims are more smooth because they're theoretical claims. They're not as shoddy as because claims that most companies actually experience. But as you can see with this block, they didn't raise the rate increases when they should early on, when their experience was worse than their expectations. They waited around until they were suffering losses, and then they try to make it up. The problem is when you wait that long, it's really too late. It's just trying to control the bleeding. Okay, so that's what we're looking at. We look at the data. Okay, go to the next slide. Okay, again, the critical components are the same. There's the contract reserve deficiency. There's the marginal if due premium, also known as a fairly discriminatory premium. And then we also review if any rate increase will make a difference. And another highly relevant component is if these blocks are in multiple states, if you give too large of a rate increase and other states don't raise their rates accordingly, Texas policyholders will be supplementing the lower rates in the other states. But our primary concern here is trying to balance the requirements. You see here in ASOP 8, their rates have to be adequate, but they also have to be fairly discriminatory. And you're having a situation where those two ends do not meet. And so it's required actuarial judgment to try to bridge that gap as best as possible. Okay, next slide. This is the issue that we have. Unless the primary actuarial model is sustainable over the entire life of the product, unless underlying seriatim models are sustainable, no method to address these deficiencies will be adequate. And regulators are forced to balance what a fair premium is to policyholders, that's the fairly discriminatory premium, which was required by state law and also ASOP 8, and also a premium that insurers need to sustain the block. That's the adequate premium. Given the current state of many LTC blocks, a premium that is fair to consumers might make the block unsustainable and may force insurers into bankruptcy. If the company cannot sustain the loss, Approval of numerous large rate increases may save the insurer, but it's going to be at the expense of forcing the policyholders to either dramatically reduce benefits or to lapse coverage. Because these large rate increases, you wait 20 years. A typical person buys this around age 55. They see a rate increase after 20 years. Now they're retired and on a fixed income, and they can't afford these large rate increases. But that's the choices we're having to make. Okay, next slide. The requested rate increase, they plugged it into the Texas method. So yes, that addresses the shortfall. The Texas method PPV analysis, which transfers the full contract reserve deficiency to the policyholders, which regulators may deem unfairly excessive. Annual monitoring would have minimized this increase. The lifetime approach is necessary, and that's what we've incorporated. And that's actually the meat of the presentation of this presentation. And also, it's in the spreadsheet, so you can actually see the details of what we're doing. Okay, so we use a lifetime approach. It's necessary to estimate 3 different components. One is the marginal premium, the if new premium, the fairly discriminatory premium. The second component it makes up is the make-up increase. That's the premium necessary to return the loss ratio to the target loss ratio. So we determine if the rate increases were implemented today. And as you can see, it's going to be on the Texas LT method. As you follow along, we won't have time to go into that here, but it estimates the rate increase, if implemented right away, would return it to the target loss ratio. And then there were cost sharing implemented to adjust reflect losses, which must be borne by the insurer. Okay, so that's all the components that we look at. Okay, next slide. Okay, so necessary to adjust 2 key assumptions for the lifetime models to prevent justifying excessive rate increases. Again, we're trying to make actuarial judgments. I'm talking about from the regulator's perspective to keep the premium as close to the fairly discriminatory premium, which is the if new premium, and the sustainable premium, which needed to sustain a block. The first adjustment is the discount rates. Lifetime projections are highly sensitive to the discount rate. Use of the statutory valuation rate will permit insurers to recoup non-existent losses. Generally, the standard valuation rate, again, is an extra measure of conservatism used for contract reserves. It's generally around 3, 5, or 4, depending on the issue year. Whereas the pricing yield, which in this case is 6.25, but if in the low interest rate environment, it would cause the insurers to suffer excessive losses due to the low interest rate environment. So what we settle on is the Moody's corporate average, and I'll discuss that more here shortly. So the discount rate is a key component that must be changed, and also the target loss ratio. The target loss ratio must be adjusted to comply with the NAIC model regulation, rate stabilization 5885, to remove the initial policy acquisition costs to rate increases. So the lifetime loss ratio, which was 60%, much of that is to cover the acquisition costs, basically the first year or two of the commissions, and also underwriting concerns to make sure that the person is priced accordingly. But that's done at issue, and those are losses that don't have to be recouped because that was covered in the initial premium. So adjustments have to be made. The target loss ratio is addressed by the minimum loss ratio applicable to the form. So that has the adjustment, the 58 plus 85 times C. That's the cumulative rate increases, which is going to include the increase that that we are approving. It's actually an iterative process, and actually the spreadsheet actually calculates that ratio for us. Okay, next slide. Okay, so to strike a balance between the statutory valuation rate and the pricing yield, Texas utilizes the Moody's corporate average, the MCA yield. The most two recent months can be seen at the NAIC website, the links there. Why do we use the Moody's corporate average yield? Because it is the best approximation that we can determine that's unbiased, that reflects the actual yield. And it's also in compliance with the standard valuation law. The standard valuation law references the Moody's corporate average is in section 4BD. It's also reflected in Texas Insurance Code 425.063. It's not included here, but I can, if anyone's interested, contact me and I'll show you where. Historically, for the historical experience, Texas uses the lowest of the geometric average of the Moody's corporate average yield and the pricing yield. Prospectively, Texas uses the highest of the recent year Moody's corporate average or the pricing yield. Okay, next slide. Okay, calculate the projections. The lifetime projections are given in the tab Texas LT method in the spreadsheet, so you can see how these are calculated. Prior to estimating the if new and makeup increases, the prior rate increases must be removed. So we have the current premiums that they have. This is at an aggregate level. And then we have a factor in the spreadsheet. It's column G, actually, if you look to it, where we remove the prior rate increases. Here is all set to 1 because there were no prior rate increases here. And to calculate what the if new premium would be. Okay, the necessary increase since inception with the marginal rate increase is given. The question is, how is the target loss ratio calculated? And I say, hold that thought, even though I've already given you the answer. I also talk about here on another slide. The marginal premium, by the way, is determined by the new assumptions, which is based on experience, but not experience itself. Since this is difficult, maybe impossible to calculate, we use experience. Okay, this is a little, okay. So we use experience, but I state that it should be based on the assumptions. Assumptions are hard to calculate, therefore we use experience. We kind of rely on the companies to adjust the assumptions to reflect the experience. Issues that we have with the experience is that for almost all the companies, the nationwide experience is not credible, and we look at Texas only experience was even less credible. Now the projections are considered fully credible because companies have the ability to adjust those based on other data that they have available, nationwide data plus data that they have from consulting companies. But the historical experience, it is what it is. But we use that. It really tells us but it still will come out higher if actual experience is higher than their expectations. Okay, next slide. Now, since companies can't collect additional premium from the past, the target loss ratio is applied to future premiums. This is basically how we calculate the makeup projection to hit the revised target loss ratio. This is first applied in year 2027 in our example. This calculation permits an increase of 245.5. Texas applies a remaining premium percentage, future premiums divided by total premium, and this is applied to calculation to get 171.1% increase. By the way, the MSA, the multi-state actuarial group that reviews these, does something similar, but they use remaining policyholders over total policyholders. The two results give you similar results. Again, though, these are the cumulative increases, including prior rate increases. Okay, next slide. Okay, Texas uses the NAIC for the cost sharing. What we use is identical to the MSA. The MSA cost sharing. Please note that the MSA uses different processes in their calculation of the recommended increases. That is, they use different processes for the target loss ratio and the discount rate. than what we use. Ours is more straightforward, and we can be more transparent with what we're using. Okay, but the cost sharing is applied to the makeup cumulative increase amount to get a 141.2% cumulative rate increase. Since this company has had no prior rate increases, we don't have to calculate out the prior rate increases to get our recommended rate increase. Next slide. So we look at all these. Okay, oh yes, adjusted to target loss ratio. Again, finally, the target loss ratio must be adjusted to account for the rate increases. We use the cumulative recommended increase with cost sharing to adjust the target loss ratio. Again, there's the calculation. The value is set equal to 0.58 plus 0.85 times the cumulative increase, divided 1 plus the cumulative increase, which includes this recommended increase. It's an iterative process. It's you have to calculate this several times to get the value that you need. But the spreadsheet does the work for you. All you have to do is press the macro. We done it for you, so you can just press. But that's what's going on. With a 141.2% increase, the revised target loss ratio would be a 73.8. Again, that's requiring that 85% of the rate increase goes to cover future claims. Okay, next slide. The result of the analysis are as follows. So this is typically what we see, but there are exceptions. The marginal increase here will be a 73.5% increase. The makeup increase is 171.1, and after you apply cost sharing is 141.2. And with the PPV method, it would be a 202.5. One thing I want to know, in this case, the marginal premium justifies a rate increase. And we ensure that the rate increases generally meet that because, again, that is a fairly discriminatory rate. And I don't know of any exception of any company that we reviewed that's had a prior rate increase where the marginal premium exceeds the current rate. So if we looked at the fairly discriminatory increase, it would actually be below what they're currently paying. But we still use it as a reference to make sure that we don't go below that. In most cases, the MSA cost shared increase is below what the Texas method would authorize. Whenever possible, because it's used to strengthen the reserve, we try to give the PPV method. Okay, go to the next slide. Okay, so when we look at what would Texas approve in this case, most likely in this case, subject to relationship to other states, Texas would approve the following: 95.3 rate increases with a 25% rate increase phased in over 3 years. The rate increase will be subject to the insurance commissioner's approval, and the company will be required to have to wait an additional 12 months to determine the lapse impact of rate increases before refiling for additional rate increase. Yeah, one impact that you're going to have with the rate increases is you're going to have people who lapse because they can't afford the rate increase. We call this shock lapse. We don't consider that. If you look at the spreadsheet, we do have a place on the main tab where you could input shock lapses, but we don't include that in our analysis because it's impossible to predict. So we have these, the rate increases are phased in, and we see what the impact is over that. And this is our current method. We're reviewing that, so this is subject to changes. But this is what we currently have now. So I think that's the end of the presentation. And we got it through in less than an hour. You know, we have 10 minutes for questions, but if you work on this, if you have questions on this, you have my contact information there. We're available to answer questions and additional concerns that companies specifically may have. And if you just want an explanation of how certain values are calculated on the spreadsheet, like I said, it's driven by formulas, so it's interactive, so you can actually see how they work. You know, one final thing I noted before, this was actually, like I said, I presented this to the SOA last year, and the Moody's rates, if you go to the Moody's average year, we actually have the years all the way back, the annual average going back to 1989. 2025 wasn't completed at when I submitted this to them. I think it reads 5.78, but in actuality, it's 5.771 if you want to adjust it. Fortunately, it doesn't change the other values. So, okay, do we have any questions?
Yes, so we have 4 questions so far. So starting at the top, is
Yes.
there a limitation on the first year expense allowance similar to the 20 pay whole life limitation?
Okay, can you say that again?
Is there a limitation on the first year expense allowance similar to the 20 pay whole life limitation?
Well, the expense with the 1 year preliminary term is assumed that the entire first year premium is actually meant to cover the expenses, and the by the way the K factor, which sets the valuation rate, is set after the end of the first year. And if you actually set, I'm just saying this from experience of having done this in the industry, the target loss ratio will be lower than the 80, which will actually require you to hold a higher reserve. But this is actually managed by the financial area in your reporting. We just assume the 85, the 85 which comes later, which assumes that you're actually holding a lower reserve. Actually, with the adjustments, we actually calculate that deficiency at a higher rate to justify or give actuarial support for a higher rate increase. We're okay with that because the bias is slight, and hopefully it offsets for timing issues.
Okay, next question. How are cohorts defined for GPV? Calendar years, issues, groups of years?
Could you say that again?
How are cohorts defined for GPV? And then some suggestions are, is it calendar years, issues, or is it groups of years?
Well, let me tell you, of course, again, we don't review the gross premium valuation. The gross premium valuation is actually the basis for it. What we're actually looking at is just the cash flow projections. You could, you can see. I can identify a slide. Say slide 14, if you were to go back to it. What we look, we don't calculate the gross premium valuation. What we look at is the projection of future premiums and future claims, and then we basically back into the calculation to estimate what the deficiency is. So again, the contract reserve and the gross premium valuation reserve is actually going to be lower than what's calculated here. So now this, like I said, in our calculation, we assume that you're using a standard valuation rate. Well, now for the contract reserve, which are based on initial assumptions, you are required to use the standard valuation rate. But for the gross premium valuation, which is based on experience, you're not obligated to use that. You could use a higher yield, which will actually lower the gross premium, basically the deficiency reserve that you have to hold. So ours actually is more conservative to give actuarial support for a higher rate increase. So we try to break it as much as possible to the insurer's advantage. They may argue with us on that, but we do what we can.
Okay, so the next question is, does the Texas DOI plan to have a guidance on how to protect the future claims?
Well, it's an ongoing discussion that we're having internally. Matter of fact, we're having a big meeting tomorrow with the strategists and dealing with the long-term care. Now, personally, I interact with the SOA not only to be transparent in how we conduct our reviews, but I'm also work with the SOA has a subgroup, which if you are involved in long-term care, I really encourage you to participate in that, where I talk directly with the industry to work on ways to make the models more sustainable to avoid these large rate increases in the future. For the old blocks, we're left with what we have and we do the best we can. But I like to work on making corrections to make this block more stable. The obvious reason is the need for long-term care isn't going away. But based on the experiences that policyholders have experienced with these sharp increases, which can be sometimes in excess of 10 times what the original premium was, that it questions, why anyone should buy these products. Okay, next question.
Yes. Is there any effort to unify the state regulators as one, because one state can refuse any rate increases, making it difficult to establish a correct reserve?
Yes, I mean this is an ongoing discussion with within the NAIC. We've had the LTC working group address this, and there's the multi-state actuarial group, which Texas was involved in. We actually have the MSA. I believe it's still overseen by Fred Anderson of Minnesota. By the way, does an excellent job at working with that. We've had to withdraw because we had some disagreements over assumptions, basically too many cooks in the kitchen, and we can address it more directly ourselves. But yes, there is an attempt, and we do communicate with them regularly to see if we can get a standard approach nationwide.
Great.
So we are trying, yes.
Yeah, so the next question is the rate increase requests you see on your side, do they impact your decision on approving the new product filings? Do you require them to increase rates ahead of time before issuing?
Whenever we see an issue, we try to address it early. As you can see for the Texas method, we do everything we can, especially early on, to address a deficiency and the deficiency in the premiums and also the deficiency in the contract reserves. It's easier to address early on. I mean, a 10% increase in the early durations can have more impact on the stability of a rate than a 200% rate increase, which occurs in the latter durations, which at that point you're just trying to control the bleeding. So, and of course, we warn companies when they come in of the risk involved. We identify concerns with the inflation protection, so carriers are fully aware of, as best we can, of the risks that they're entailing. And again, we're trying to address it. One issue with the 5% inflation protection is something that's required by federal guidelines for the premium to be tax deductible, and any insurer is obligated to offer the 5% inflation protection, which is good, but it's good protection, but with a level premium, the rates to support that would be excessive, and truth of the matter, with a 5% inflation over time, the benefits really exceed the need.
Okay, thanks. Looks like we're right about time, just 30 seconds until noon here. So I think that will be it. I see there's two more questions that weren't answered, but as Michael mentioned, you can contact him, and his contact info is in the PowerPoint.
Yeah, just submit them to me. Yes, and again, like I know we have tight time. We encourage input, especially from the industry, who's actually in the game on this. We're transparent. We're very transparent, very open. And if you have a question, if you're studying for the exam, you see this up, feel free to give me a call and I can give you insights to it. Love hearing from you. Thanks, guys.